Welcome to our Developer Days session on building user interfaces with Identity Security Cloud. My name is Neil McGlennon. I'm a principal architect here at SailPoint, longtime SailPointer. I'm happy to be talking to you guys again this year at Developer Days. I've spoken at previous Developer Days around things like our AWS Event Bridge integrations with event triggers. This year I wanted to switch it up a little bit and talk a little bit about something that we hear a lot from the field, which is how do I build a user interface on top of our platform? And so we've been hearing this a bit, and we have a lot of rich APIs and toolkits to share with you guys. So we thought about actually walking through a live build of this using a common framework, and we'll talk more about what that is. And so really what we're talking about today is user interface development. And so why might you do this and how might you do this? Let's talk a little bit about why you might want to embark on something like this. So the user interface development is really for customers that want to have their own customized user experience, right? It's possible to create and develop your own user interface in your own way, your own style. We see this for customers that really want to apply, special care and handling to specific situations. They can make a customer user or a user experience that's customized to their user base. And this could be something like access request. This could be other things like launching a form, or even other types of user experiences that you want to come up with. And the nice thing is because of how Identity Security Cloud is built, it's built on top of standards and REST APIs and all the things that in this whole developer community. You can kind of bring your own code and develop it your way. And so some of the things that we're going to be showing today are some really popular frameworks. But you can actually bring your own libraries and your own style. If you want to code in React or Svelte or something else, you can. I'm going to be showing Angular here today. So you can really bring your own code, your own libraries, your own technologies, and stuff that you can build and manage. And so the nice thing is this all leverages our rich feature APIs, but does so in a supportable fashion. And so, gone are the enterprise days where you had to customize this solution and put your whole solution at risk. Instead, you allow your customizations to sit on top of our cloud, and run it wherever you want to run it, whether that's cloud or on premise or on your own data centers or anything like that. But you bring your own technologies and things to bear, but keep it in a supportable fashion. You're leveraging the supported and rich API fabric that we have. And these are, of course, all the things that we have on our developer portal, our developer community, right? You can see those, you can interact with those. We have a rich set of SDKs to interact with those and that sort of thing. In addition, if you're building a user interface, a lot of the other things come up, not only selecting your own technologies, but and interacting with the rich APIs that Identity Security Cloud offers, but how do you do things like authentication and authorization, right? And we wanted to make those things simple. And so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel here. And so we wanted to leverage common standards, things such as OAuth and JSON web tokens and things like that. And these have a lot of great support. They're also very widely adopted standards. There's a lot of libraries out there. There's a lot of help out there. And so whether you're building and coding something in your own language or your own frameworks or leveraging these open standards, there's a lot of resources at your disposal, not only within the SailPoint developer community, but beyond that. In the developer community in general, the worldwide developer community, if you will. And so there's a lot of resources and things like that you can leverage. And so let's talk about a reference example. What are we going to be building today, and what am I going to be showing you how to build? Now, the reference example I'm going to walk through with you guys today is going to be built on the Angular framework. We'll talk about what that is here in a second. This is also something I plan on sharing with the developer community. We're going to be checking this in our open source framework. We'll also be posting a tutorial. So everything that you're seeing here, not only can you refer back to it in live video as I'm speaking to you now, but you can also follow along with a guide as well. So we'll be publishing that out on the developer community. And so let's talk a little bit about what we're building. So we're going to use a variety of technologies in this. So the first up we're going to be using is OAuth 2.0. And again, OAuth 2.0 is basically a framework around how you authenticate and authorize your users within a system. And within Identity Security Cloud, we're built on top of the OAuth 2 standard. And so in order to extend that user interface, extend Identity Security Cloud into your own interface, we're going to be leveraging that technology. Again, this is open source. There's a very good standard. It is part of the IETF standard as well. There's an RFC out there for it. These slides actually have links in them, and we'll be publishing those links along with the tutorial as well. And so you can kind of see and read all about this stuff if you just do a simple search on OAuth. Now, there is some particularities about OAuth. OAuth 2.0 is meant to be very easy to use, very developer-friendly. There's a lot of existing toolkits and frameworks out there that use OAuth. And so we're going to be using some of those here. And just know that there are different flows and styles of usage with OAuth 2. And so if you all have written scripts or even other developer frameworks, you probably encountered OAuth to some degree. And if you've used any of our APIs and things like Postman, you're probably familiar with things like client ID and secrets. And that's used in kind of a client credential type of OAuth flow. We're going to be using a slightly different form of OAuth, which is called an authorization code flow. And we'll get more into the details of what that flow looks like here in a little bit. Now, once, as the byproduct of OAuth, once you're authorized, one of the things that we're granted with is a token, and that's an access token. Now, there's also a standard for access tokens, and we leverage standards for even something as simple as an access token. And so we're using JSON Web Token standard. And so this is a standard for encoding information into that access token, not only when it expires, but also information about the user. What identity are those? What authorizations do they have? And things like that. And so this is a standard. You can look more up on this. You can go to jwt.io. It also is an IETF ratified standard that's being adopted. And so you can find a lot more information about JWT online. And then we're also going to be leveraging the Angular framework. And this is a very popular feature-rich open source web framework that provides a lot of opinionated ways to doing things that help scale. And we build a lot of our own interfaces here at SailPoint using Angular. And there's a lot of existing frameworks and plugins and things like that comes out with. This is something that was designed and built by Google engineers, and Google remains a very big sponsor of Angular. If you're interested in it, there's a lot of great tutorials on Angular's website. Go to angular.io. You can download tutorials, example code, help and docs there. There's a lot of great resources out on the internet there. So those are some of the technologies that we're going to have. We'll be walking through those a little bit more in depth as we go through our examples. So let's talk about really what we're building here. And so our reference example use case is that we have an organization that has a bunch of bespoke business processes. And they want to extend those bespoke business processes out into some sort of interface. And so what they want to do is they want to build on top of Identity Security Cloud's great framework, but they also want to expose some of the extensibilities that we have. So if you know anything about Identity Security Cloud and some of the other sessions here, there's some wonderful forms and workflow capabilities. Now, we're not going to get too much into forms and workflow into this section, but we are going to talk about how you can launch a form directly from a user interface. And so in this reference example use case, maybe a user logs in, leveraging the power of OAuth and JWT, and then they can see a tile. And when they see that tile, they can click on that tile and it launches over into a form dynamically where they can fill out some details and then continue on into the workflow. And so there's some other examples of submitting forms into workflows and things like that. We'll walk through a little bit of that. But again, if you really want some more information around forms and workflows, there's plenty of other sessions out there. I highly recommend attending some of those as well. And our goal here is really to leverage as much out-of-the-box SailPoint functionalities as possible, but still being able to control our own user experience and leverage our own technologies, and do so in a fairly easy fashion. Again, I have to build this while we're here in this session today, so can't last weeks or days or anything like that. I only have an hour. So let's see how this is going to work. Let's talk about how all these things are going to come together. And so first and foremost, we have our Identity Security Cloud platform, right? This is where predominantly a lot of the components are going to run, except for the things that we're building today. Outside of that Identity Security Cloud is our example application. This is the thing that we're going to be building. And so you can choose where you would want to run this. Some customers may run this in AWS. Some may run it in their own data center. Some customers can run it on things like Heroku. You can pick and choose which technology. There's a ton of places to run simple progressive web apps these days. And so we have our example web application here that we're going to build. Now, our goal, like we saw on the previous slide, was to be able to launch a form, which then in turn launches workflow. And so we know that we're going to have a form and we're going to have workflow. I already have some of those pre-configured within our Identity Security Cloud, and I'm happy to kind of walk through that with you guys. Now, what we're going to be doing is leveraging some of those components, right? We have an API gateway that has all of our rich set of APIs. We also have our OAuth endpoints for getting and receiving tokens. And so we're going to be interfacing with some of those items. So first and foremost, we're going to build this app. And we're going to leverage basically some of the things you would learn on Angular's website, which is how do you create an app in Angular. So we're going to actually walk through that together. A stock app, we're going to modify it slightly, and we're going to build that together. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to authenticate using that OAuth 2.0 API. And what we're going to do is we're going to leverage an OAuth token using the authorization code flow, which is a specific type of flow where we call in with a client ID and request an authorization code, and what happens is you redirect to Identity Security Cloud where you authenticate. Once you authenticate, it gives you a code, an authorization code, hence the flow's name, back to our app, and our app takes the client ID, the client secret, and that authorization code from when the user was registered. It'll take all those three things, and then it'll call in to get a token, just like you would if you had a client ID and secret and a personal access token. Now, again, this is a web flow, right? And so those client ID and secrets are really used to facilitate, but they don't have the permissions and things like that with the user. All that comes in from the access token. And so we're going to build that flow. We're going to leverage a library there, show you there's a lot of different libraries we can choose. I'm going to pick a fairly popular Angular library that people tend to use for these types of flows. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to call our APIs. And so we're going to leverage a call to go create a form instance. And so what we're going to do is pass a reference to that particular form that we want to create an instance to. And then we'll receive back a response. And then what our application then is going to do is then redirect to that forms instance. And so that app will effectively just look like a user is clicking a button and launching over to that newly launched form, and then filling out that form and continuing their journey within Identity Security Cloud. So really the only things that exist outside of SailPoint are this little web app, right? That has some authentication and authorization, and it has ability to launch these forms. So that's the thing that we're going to be building here together today. So let's, without further ado, let's go and start building this. So I'm going to flip over here to my desktop now. And let me know if you guys can see that. Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to start here in the terminal. Now, you may be saying, well, why the terminal? Well, because a lot of the creating of these apps and things like that, if you look at a lot of the example Angular documentation, they typically start in the terminal, so I figure I'd start there too. Now, this is a Node.js-based solution. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you which version of Node I'm running here, so you can kind of see which versions I'm working with. So you can see I'm on Node version 20 here. And we also have Angular's CLI, their command line interface, installed already. If you don't know how to install that, you can run npm, which is Node's package manager, npm install with Angular CLI. There's instructions on their website. I'm not going to install it here because I already have it installed. Once you have it installed, you can run ng, which is how you invoke that command line. And so you can run ng in version, and this will tell me which version I'm running, right? So you can see here I'm running version 17 of the Angular CLI. I'm currently in my workspace, and so that's kind of where I want to build this app. And so really to start a new project, you just basically say ng new, and then you give it a project name. And so I'm just going to call it example SaaS app. I haven't created one of these before. And then it asks you some questions here. And for a lot of things we're doing here, we're not really going to be doing a whole lot of CSS styling or anything like that. In fact, I'm going to be using a different type of CSS library. So I'm just going to choose SCSS for now. And it asks some other questions about some other features that Angular has around server-side rendering, static site generation, anything like that. I'm going to say no. Those are more advanced features. And so what this is going to do is it's going to go and create our project structure, right? And so now I'm leveraging the command line. This is not the only tool I'm going to be leveraging. There's other tools that we're going to be leveraging here while this installs. I'm going to be leveraging VS Code for a lot of this. And if you're not familiar with VS Code, it's a Microsoft integrated development environment where it has a lot of code completion, also has a terminal inside this, which we'll be switching to. I'm also going to be leveraging a web browser. I'm using Chrome here because Chrome has some wonderful developer tools already installed. And we're also going to be leveraging Postman because we're going to be making API calls. And so I want to make sure that we can make API calls outside of our system and then port those into our app. So let's go back to our site. We can see that it has been installed successfully. So we're pretty good there. So let's go to our example SaaS app that we just created. So we're in that directory. You can see here. And let's go and start this up. And so the way you do that with Angular CLI is you run ng serve. And what this does, there's a lot of different other commands that you have on the command line. There can be ng build if you want to build it for distributing it to production. But the ng serve is kind of the development friendly way, right? And so you can run ng serve, and this will do is it'll spin up with some hot reloading. And you notice here that it says it's locally running on localhost 4200. 4200 is kind of the port that Angular typically chooses. Now, there's different configurations you can apply to this, but for all intents and purposes, this is just an out-of-the-box app. We don't need to change any of this now. So if we go into our local host here, we should be able to hit refresh, and we can see that here is that Angular application running. It says, hello, example SaaS app. So this is all boilerplate stuff that we're running. And so that's all well and good. Now, we don't really want to do all of our coding inside the terminal. It was great for getting things up and running, but we're going to switch to VS Code, and that show you the rich type of editing that you can do there. So we're going to go ahead and cancel out of this. Notice that when you cancel out of that because it was running, it should be no longer running anymore because it was running in that terminal. I'm going to go ahead and close this terminal for now. And then I'm going to go back to VS Code here, and I'm going to open that same area we just opened. So if we go to Workspace, example SaaS app, and here is our example SaaS app. So this is these are all the things that were just configured by that CLI. there's a lot of files here. Now, one of the interesting things about VS Code is there's also a terminal built in. So you can say new terminal, and up in the bottom pops a terminal. And so notice that you can say, where are you? Same commands. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Here we go. And so in here, you can also run the same commands. So like if we said ngserve, and we're just going to build the same thing again. And so now it's running, but it's running inside our VS Code app. And so if we go back here, we should see that this is running. Okay, so now we just did the same thing that we did in that command line, but now we have a rich interface. And so if you're not familiar with these types of apps, there's a lot of walkthroughs of these things on Angular's site. Highly recommend looking at some of that stuff there. I'm going to point out some of the files that we're going to be interacting with here. So we're going to be interacting with a couple of these files as we go in. We'll be spending a lot of time on these app components in here and the configurations within. So we'll be going through those. One of the first ones we're going to fire up here is the app component TS. And TS, if you're not familiar with that, it stands for TypeScript. And so TypeScript is a Java extension or JavaScript extension that gives kind of strong typing to JavaScript, which is fairly loosely typed. And so this is what we have here, and we see title is example app. And so we see this here. You know, we're not going to use a title in here. So we're going to, let's say I don't want a title anymore. Maybe I want to delete that, right? And so what we can do is say, but I do want a username, and I want to set that equal to, you know, Neil McGlennon. And I'm going to hit save. Now, I get an error here, and that's because in that app here, it's looking for title. Title does not exist. And that's because this component's HTML is referencing title. And that's because this is all boilerplate. So what I'm going to do is take all this boilerplate and remove it. And what I am going to do is add a h1, and I'm going to reference that username variable in here and save it. And notice that it did regenerate everything, and it should be good to go. So now if we go in here on localhost, I can see Neil McGlennon. So cool. So now we've just edited that app. And we've made our own variable in here. And we're going to be getting a lot more fancy with this, I promise. But the component here, you can kind of see you setting a variable. That's pretty easy. Now, if you wanted to, you can also close down the running of this. So I don't want to run that anymore. I want to actually generate a new component. So one of the things you can do is you can generate things like environments files. And so one of the best practices is to put is in Angular to put environments files for various types of configurations that you may have in different environments. So we're going to be generating these, and we're going to use them a little bit later on. But you can see here in the green, there's a new environment section, and there's one for development, and there's one for production, essentially. And so we're going to be using these a little bit later on. Now, in this app, I also want to get a little fancier. We can use CSS, but I want to also install a framework for doing some styling. And so a framework that I like is Tailwind. Tailwind is a framework for rendering your HTML tags. It's kind of a CSS post processor, essentially. And so really I'm going through this so you can kind of see how you can install and integrate other types of libraries with this. And so in order to install this, you run some commands here, and these are on Tailwind's website. If you're not familiar with Tailwind, I'll show you what that is. If you go to development, you can kind of go here. This is some of the different components and things like that they have. This is really just meant to accelerate our view here a little bit. So on their site, you can run, they'll give you these commands, but you can run npm install Tailwind CSS post CSS auto prefixer. And what that does is it adds this to our node package in Angular. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to generate a configuration file. And npx is a configuration file, so you notice it generated a configuration file here. Now, because we are in Angular, this configuration file has to be configured slightly differently. And what we have to do is we have to, in the content section, make sure that we are looking at TypeScript files in HTML. And so that's really the only change that we have to do to this file. And then the last thing we do is we have to go to our styles, and we have to say that, hey, we're going to use our Tailwind styles. And so I'm just going to come in here, and we're going to reference those and hit save. So I save that. I save that. Now that we have our styles components ready to go, we're going to go to our app component that we have. And that's the one that has our HTML, right? And in this, what I'm going to do is instead of just showing a username, I want to show maybe a toolbar. And I want to get this ready to show the username, but also to have login and logout buttons and things like that. So we're going to start scaffolding out our application that we're building. So I'm going to paste some stuff in here, the magic of editing. So you can see here in here, this is all just standard HTML in here, but there's in these classes, there's some. These are references to stylings that Tailwind offers, right? And then in here, there's a link with a logo. There's a button in here that's going to show our username. There's also another button here that's going to show refresh, another button that's going to show logout, and another button that's going to show login. And so I'm going to go save this. Now, what we're going to do is run ng-serve. And if all goes well, no errors, it's up and running again in our localhost. So I can come over here and localhost, and you can see here that my variable is now in this little box, right? It says Neil McGlennon, SailPoint, there's a refresh, log out, log in. Now these buttons are just placeholders. They're not wired to do anything yet. This is just our scaffold for our app. So we have a skeleton app, we have some styling, we have some cool buttons for login and logout. You know, we should be good to take this to the next phase, right? And so if you kind of think back to our diagram, we have our first section, right, which is our example app. Our app's up and running. We have buttons. Now we need to move to the next phase, which is we need to add authentication to this, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to leverage a library, and the library that we're going to be leveraging is this library. This is an open source Angular OAuth OpenID Connect type of library. We're leveraging the Angular OAuth 2 portion of this. And so this is a library. There's a lot of usage of this. There's a lot of contributors, active contributors. This is used a lot. That's out there, and it's used by over almost 8,000 people. So it's used in a lot of different things out on GitHub. And so this is one of the reasons why I gravitated towards this, and it was relatively easy to configure. And there's documentation and things like that in here. There's examples and all that. I'm not going to go through all this in depth, but what I am going to do is integrate with this library. And so that was a fairly popular client library. It is available to open source with an MIT license. So, the nice thing about Identity Security Cloud here is that you can bring open source standards into your framework. And again, you can make whatever call you want. If you don't like this library, you can go use a different one. And there are a bunch of different ones out there. And so first thing we're going to do in our app here is we're going to install that library. And the way you install that is you run npm install Angular OAuth 2.oidc -- save. And so hopefully I spelled everything right. Looks like I did. You hit enter on that. What that's going to do is just like we did with Tailwind, it's going to add that to our package and our node modules, and it'll be available for us to configure, right? And so now this isn't the only thing you have to do. Now that we have the library there, we actually have to configure our app to use it. And so the way that you configure this app with a default app, according to their documentation, is we have to go into this app config folder or file. And in this, there's a couple of imports we're going to add here. And so we're going to add import, provide, HTTP client. And we're also going to add import, provide, OAuth client. And so notice that the nice thing about using something like VS Code is it has some syntax completion for me. So now that we have these, these are grayed out because it says you're not really using these yet. So let's use them. So in these providers sections, we're going to add some new providers in here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add provide that HTTP client. And we're going to also provide an OAuth client. And those are functions. And then this provide router routes kind of comes with Angular. That's fine. If we did want to get more fancy with Angular routes and stuff like that, you could. We're not going to go into all that here today. I don't think we have enough time. So we have this kind of now wired to use that library. Our application can use that library. Now, there's a little bit more to it than that. So what we also have to do is we have to kind of set up, remember I mentioned we had those environment files earlier. So we have an environment those variables that we want to use, and so we want to wire that with a set of configurations. And so now one of the things is in order to use this, you're going to have to use a configuration file. Now before I do that, I want a place to store these, and that environments file that we created earlier is a perfect place to store these. And so in environments, I'm going to go in here, and what we have here, I'm going to create a bunch of variables. And so notice that we have client ID, client secret. We're going to come back to that. But there's API URLs. This is what we're going to be using this later, which is where our API for our Identity Security Cloud will be. There's a login and a token URL. These are specific URLs that these OAuth codes use. And there's also a logout URL. So when you hit that logout button, it would essentially be calling these types of URLs. Because this is part of the OAuth flow, there's also scopes. So you can choose how much data that you want in that authorization flow. And so our configuration is going to be picking up on these environment variables. Now I'm going to copy this after I save it. I'm going to also copy it to development. The only thing about development is I'm going to set this to production, not true, which is false. So the nice thing about using these environments, if you decide to build for different environments when you're running, it may use your development, and if you're running in production, you may use your production environment variables. And so now we're going to come back to client ID and secret here. Now these client ID and secrets that we're going to use here are part of an authorization code. It's going to be different than a personal access token type of client ID and secret. And so these are not personal access tokens, by the way. So now that we have these kind of scaffolded out, we're going to go create a file in app, and we're going to call this our auth config.ts. And so this is an empty file here. And so what this is going to do is it's going to have all of our settings for configuring our OAuth 2 interaction. And it's going to reference some of those variables that we have in those development environments. And so I'm going to go through and drop these in. And there's a lot of these are all documented out on that library's website. You can kind of see references to these, like we're going to redirect to a window. We're going to use the client ID from our environment variables, client ID. So there's a lot of these things I kind of did for you. There's things like show debug information that I'm automatically turning on for sake of this developer session. So there's a lot of other things in here too. You can kind of configure these as you might need, but these work really well with our framework. And so now that that's saved, we're going to go through and we need to still deal with these client ID and secrets. So where do those come from? And so this is where our friend Postman comes in. Actually, before we do that, let's go and browse our developer community docs. So if you go to developer.sailpoint.com under docs, if you can look in our APIs here, we have in our beta APIs, there's OAuth Clients. And so OAuth Clients these are different than personal access tokens. And so you can actually see personal access tokens elsewhere in these docs, like right down here. But notice that these are up here. They're different. And personal access token is a specialized OAuth client. These OAuth clients are really meant for building apps. Guess what we're building? An app. And so these OAuth clients we're going to use, so you can list existing ones, you can create existing ones, and so we're going to be calling create. And so here's example documentation of how we would create one of these. Now, over in Postman, I can go over to my Postman collection here and say create OAuth client. And I have one here that I'm going to create for Developer Days 2024, which is today. And in here, you have just name, description. This stuff is really just meant so if you see these in the UI or API, you know what these things are. You have some token validities, so you'll want to match these with configurations that you may have in your web apps and timeouts and things like that. Now, notice that redirect URLs or URIs. When we go from your identity security from your app to Identity Security Cloud, it's going to authenticate you. And then it needs to come back to your app. So it needs to know where your app is. And it needs to know what are acceptable URLs for that app. And so the only acceptable one that we're going to have right now is localhost 4200, which is where I'm running. Now, in a production environment, you may have other URLs that you decide to authorize for this token. Now, grant types. Grant types, as I said earlier, there's different types of OAuth flows. We're going to be using two flows. We're going to be using authorization code to get the code and to log a user in. That's an interactive flow. And then we're also going to use a refresh token flow, because what refresh token does is as the user is using the app, it can actually background call and refresh that token. And so everything else here can kind of stay as is, but I'm going to go ahead and say send. And what happens is it gives me a set of details. Now, before I navigate away from this page, this is actually a very important moment to note that this is the only point in time that I have this client. You have the client ID, but this is the only point in time that I have this secret for this OAuth client. So what I'm going to do is go take that secret, go back to my Visual Studio Code app, plop it in here. I'm just going to do that for both. You may not do this in a real production environment. And then we have the ID. Now, there's some other ways. Now, you may be saying, well, if I put these client ID and secrets in here, wouldn't I be exposing some of these? You could. You could also obfuscate some of these things as environment variables and things like that. Also, the client ID and secret here, if you expose these, it's not the end of the world because they can't do much by themselves, right? A user you still have to authenticate against Identity Security Cloud in order to get that code. And so if you had just these two, you're not going to be able to get in. So these are very different than a personal access token. And so we'll see that pretty evidently here. So now I have my environment variables saved in here. I have my app config saved and my components that we're going to be updating here next. So now, actually, this app component is what we're going to be updating next. So now, in order for our library to be used, we want to kind of wire up those buttons, right? And so it means we got to do some more stuff to this particular app. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to import some components here. So we have OAuth service and OAuth code flow. That's that configuration I just did, and there's that library that we imported. So I'm going to bring those in. I'm going to create a set of, actually, you know what? I'm going to copy and paste all of this. There's going to be a lot of stuff that comes in here. And so we're going to walk through what this is. So I have our OAuth service. That's the library we imported. And we have our configurations, which is this file. The other one. The auth configurations, this file. And so we have those configurations. What we're going to do is we have a constructor here that constructs this and configures it with that configuration. So what we're doing is we're saying, hey, library, use this configuration that we set, and those configurations, again, leverage our environment variables. We set up some automatic silent refreshes. We're going to try a login code flow, and we're going to subscribe to any errors with any errors going, any events going to our console. So this is mainly just so we can see what's going on. We also added some helpers here. So we have access token, has a valid access token, is authenticated. And essentially, these are just helper methods that we have that we can reference inside our HTML. We have things around token payload, authorities, has an authority, username, ID. These are all things that a token's going to return. We also have methods for login, logout, and refresh, and these are calling that library. So login tries that initial init code flow, and then it tries the login code flow. And then for logout, it just logs out. It's going to destroy all the variables that we have and everything else. And if you hit refresh, it's going to grab a new token. It's going to call that refresh flow behind the scenes. And so I'm going to save that. And so now what we're going to do is we have our component ready to go using the library. Now let's go through and we're going to we want to see this in action. And so what we're going to do is we're going to modify our code here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add to it. And what this did is that you see the same header that we had before up here. But we added a new section at the bottom, and if you're authenticated, then you will see information about how you're authenticated. And if you're not authenticated, you're going to see empty information. And so we'll see that here together when we run this. And then we also have in our buttons up here, we can see that those things are wired to that refresh, log out, and log in, and we still see our username and things like that, except for username shouldn't be coming from our app component anymore. Notice that we removed username here, and instead username is coming from here. It's coming from our token that we get. So, so we've moved some things around, and so we're ready to run this. I'm going to go ahead and, if all goes well, hit ng-serve. And so this is going to build, and it's going to run. So no errors or anything. So now we're going to flip over and step away from our wonderful documentation, and you can see here we have localhost 4200. You can see that I actually still have a session token in here. I'm going to clear this real quick. I'm in the developer tools right now. This is from a previous run, so gotta love demos. So I'm going to clear this stuff out. I'm not authenticated right now, so let's try this again. Okay, last time I didn't log out. So now I'm in here. You can see now that we have SailPoint. We have a login button because I'm not authenticated. So we're hiding those other two buttons. And you can see you are logged out. There's no username, no authorities, no token. And so if I hit login, well, what I expect is this should attempt to go to Identity Security Cloud with that authorization token and log in. So if we hit login, it comes in and logs in. And it looks like I'm still logged. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit log out, and hopefully you can kind of see that flow again. So now it's going to redirect. And see now I'm logging in. I'm going to log into SailPoint Services. And now I'm logged in. I'm logged in as SailPoint Services. I have a username SailPoint Services. I can actually click to this, and it'll actually give me a link directly into my Identity Security Cloud. That's the way I built this. So you can kind of really stitch these things together, make your own experience. And so this is something that I created, right? The authorities, you can see I'm logged in as SailPoint Services, and I'm an org admin. So if you wanted to show or hide different navigations based on that, you can. You can see this is my access token here. And this is a JWT token. I'm going to copy and paste this. And if you go to jwt.io, you can kind of see what information is in these tokens. So if you paste it in, you can see here that there's information in this token. Here's my identity ID, I'm SailPoint Services, here's my authorities, all this kind of rich information. And so that's essentially what my application is doing. It has a lot of that information in here. And I can hit refresh in there, and that library is refreshing that token. And notice that at the bottom here, you're seeing some stuff change. It's very subtle, but watch this last line of the token. You can really see it. And you can see that that token is getting refreshed and changed. And don't take my word for it. You can actually inspect the console, and you can see the OAuth events in here. And so as we hit refresh in here, you can see what calls we're making, where we're making those, and what tokens that what's being generated. And again, even if I hit log out here, you can also see how it logs out. It looks like it can't read something. Now it redirects me back to IdentityNow, Identity Security Cloud. Come back in here. You can see that we're logged out. There's no session or anything like that. I can hit log out again, and I have an active session because I still have Identity Security Cloud running with, cookies and things like that behind the scenes. So you can see here is token received from Identity Security Cloud. and you can see OAuth successful events. And these are coming from that library, and we put all this extra information in here. So great, now we actually have an application that's running alongside Identity Security Cloud, leveraging the user that we're logged in with. And so now we can actually get along to the actual business of actual, launching a form. And so in here, what we want to do is we want to create that launch pad, and we want to launch a form and then redirect to that. That's kind of our main use case here. And so where that's going to happen first is we're going to open up our app component. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a variable called launchers. And so I'm going to add this. And so this is launchers, launch a form. And it says this launches a form. And the button's going to have a word launch on it. And then you need a form definition. And this is the form that I want to launch. And just to kind of show you what that form looks like, this form, let's flip over to Identity Security Cloud, yield test. Notice I'm still logged in. And over on the admin section, if we go to global forms, you can see here the forms that we have. And so like I have a create form. Let's edit this one, continue. And this is the form that I'm going to be launching. And so you can select which form. So you can see like it's entitlement management creation form. So this will allow us to say create entitlement, it collects some attributes and things like that. So that's the form I want to launch to. So a user will click a button, it'll launch straight over to this form, an instance of it. So how do we do that? So we know that we have a launch button that we just added, or a launcher data that we want to launch. So we want to launch this form. And so we want to also launch when we have a button click. So what we're going to do is we're going to also add a new launch button here. And so we're going to say launch, and we're going to say launching for user this name. Okay? And then what we're also going to do is we're going to open up our app component, HTML, and within this authenticated section, we're going to add a new section. And so maybe above our token stuff, we're going to add this. And so what this is going to do is it says for every launcher in that list of launchers, what we're going to do is we're going to show the name and description, and we're going to have a button that says launch the launcher. And so this just saved. So let's flip over, and let's go back to our example app. And here's our launch form, right? And so we can inspect this. You could hide all the stuff at the bottom. We don't really need it anymore. It's mainly there for contiguity. But a launch form, now this doesn't do a whole lot. All it does when you click that button here is just print out to the console. And so if we click this, we should see launching a form for user SailPoint services. So we know what user launched this, and you can see as many times you're clicking, as many times we're getting logs. So this is cool. We can now see this launching. Now, how do you create one of these? So the way you create one of these is to leverage a form instance. And if we go to Postman, a form instance looks something like this. Whoop, that's list. I want to create. This is what happens when you call create form instance. You pass in who it was created by, where it's created for. Here's that form definition ID. There's some inputs you can pass it, and then the identity, who's the user logged in, that's launching this. So if you launch one of these things, you press send. I just launched a form. Now the interesting thing about this is it gives you a URL of where this directs to. So if we go here, here's the instance of that form that a user can fill out, right? And so you can give it name and owner and that kind of stuff. So that's cool. So that's what we want our user interface to replicate. Now, back to our code. That's not the code. We're going to go and we're going to stop running for a moment. And what we're going to do first is we're going to do we're going to do, here we are. Let's clear that. ng generate service SailPoint. What I'm doing is I'm generating a service that will be used to make API calls. And so in SailPoint service, and here it has a constructor and everything like that. What I'm going to do is augment this, and you can see that it really only has a couple things. The SailPoint service has an HTTP client. It has some error handling. It also has ability to post, and it sets an authorization header based on the access token that's passed in, and it's going to call the API URL that's in our environment variables with the endpoint that's passed in, and then it has a body that's passed in with any other headers that it's set up here. So really what this is doing is this is mimicking exactly what we're doing in Postman. It's kind of your own Postman client here, but in Angular. All right, so now we have that. Now what we're going to do is we are going to update our logic inside our component. And so if we go back to this component in here, we're going to augment this constructor, and we're going to add in the SailPoint service. It probably doesn't know where to get that from. Import SailPoint service from SailPoint service. Cool. And so we have SailPoint service, and then what we're going to do is we are going to augment our launch method here. And so that launch method's at the bottom. So instead of just printing out to the console, we're going to do some other things, right? And so we're given the launcher. What we're going to do is we're going to replace it with this version. Let's walk through what this does. So when we call launch, it has that same launcher name for user. It's going to calculate a new expiration date, which is today's date, +1. It's building that body here. We see created by, expire, form definition, form input. It's creating that same thing that we have here in Postman. And so we have all that. We have in here the form definition ID, some of the inputs. And for the recipients, it's going to be assigned to the person that's logged in. They're going to be the person that is running this. Now, what we're going to do is then we're going to call that SailPoint service. We're going to post this to beta form instances. We're going to pass in our access token, and we're going to subscribe to this. And when we get the response, we're going to then redirect that response to that standalone form URL. That is that URL that we saw right here. So we're going to redirect to that. And so I'm going to hit save on that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our console, ng-serve, and it looks like we're up and running. So we're going to go back. Now what we've done this time though is we've wired up this launch button. And so we're ready to launch this. Now we have this all set up going through our service now. And so what this should do is invoke a form instance. And then what we'll do is take that response URL, and we're going to redirect to it, just like we talked about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and click this button. And you can see here, we've created the form instance, and we've now redirected to that URL. Right now, you can kind of see up here in the URL, we have my tenant name, Neil Test. And we can see that this is actually our native Identity Security Cloud cloud platform Atlas workflows and forms. So I can go ahead and use this form like I would normally. I can select things in here and give it a name. In this case, my group. Give it things like owner. So I'm just using the form like normal, and you fill these things out, and then we can get this going into our workflow. I can hit submit, and now what I've done is I've launched over from my application into a form, and that form is now invoked a workflow. And so all that did required in our admin section here is it just required a bit of a trigger that we had. So for entitlement creation is the workflow that we have here. Let me go ahead and disable this so I can show it to you. And you can see here, this is the form that we submitted, and it would trigger this workflow. So you can kind of design what you want to do here, but that kind of shows you how you can wire up your own application and leverage the power of all the frameworks you want to build on top of our standards for OAuth and JWT tokens. And you can really build your own experience, bring your own libraries to the table, use your own creativity, and cater to your own user experiences. So this source code, this example, and tutorial will all be available on our developer community at developer.sailpoint.com. If you have any questions, feel free to discuss on the developer community. With that, thank you very much.